Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. 3 nights, 6,000 volunteers, over 4,000 square miles, taking the Los Angeles homeless count. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm delighted to be joined today by the CEO of the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, otherwise known as LAHSA, Dr. LAHSA. So great to have you here. It was a little disconcerting and a little shocking to see the numbers from this year's homeless count. Up 10% in the city, 9% in the county. This is really the first time that you've been in the office to be able to grab these numbers, see what it means. What did it say to you when you saw it?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And it was really hard for all of us to see those numbers. They were shocking. They're very alarming numbers. But we're not surprised that we see numbers going up. I've been saying that the numbers have to pass the smell test. And we know what we are seeing every day on our streets. And so it's not surprising, but it's deeply alarming. And we have a lot of work to do here in Los Angeles. And I think while this is a time of great concern, seeing the level of increased homelessness, never before have we seen the level of potential collaboration and locked arms between Mayor Bass in the city and the Board of Supervisors at the county and me at LAHSA, ready to continue to lock arms and elevate our partnership.
So that whole idea of locking arms, it sounds great. I know there's the cooperation between the city and the county. So what is going into place to make that cooperative effort work?
Well, I think the most important first step was that the mayor called a state of emergency day one of her administration and brought in the service providers and basically had a very intense conversation about what was ahead in this struggle to combat homelessness. But in that room was also the head of Measure H, we call it the Homeless Initiative, Sheree Tordoff, was there, and county leaders, including Supervisor Hahn, all locking arms around the idea that we have to coordinate resources like never before. I mean, there's great efforts underway in both the city and county. For years, there's been investments, and people are very concerned about the level of investment that we've seen and worry about, the results. And so we've gotten over 20,000 people each year for all the years that Measure H has been in place, housed, and yet people are falling into homelessness faster than we can move them out of homelessness. And so this coordination that we are looking at is important. The call of the emergency by the mayor, followed by the state of emergency called by the Board of Supervisors, is what really brings us all to this moment of saying we must do whatever it takes. We must speed up the process of moving people from encampments into housing, and we must remove all barriers and red tape.
Okay, so let's create the scene of what this cooperation looks like. Obviously, there are people in leadership roles such as yourselves. Everyone has the opportunity to convene, and then understanding what's already in place and how those efforts are working or not working. I mean, how does one coordinate? I mean, even just saying how large the county was to do the homeless count, 4,000 square miles, in Los Angeles being, a country in and of itself, if you want to really think about it. How do you coordinate something that enormous with all the different people, all the different entities, and all the different interests that are trying to tackle this problem?
That's a great question. I'll provide you with a contrast.
Okay.
Prior to this moment, you would have a number of nonprofits throughout the city and county working on their own mission and work of housing folks or helping people who are impoverished pay their rents or keep the lights on, or making sure that they have groceries for their children, making sure they're educating their folks and getting support. And each of us working alongside, but in our own way and space and corner of the universe. And you have the city and county going forward with initiatives that are deeply focused on addressing the crisis. And we're all in our silos, if you will, doing our best, absolutely, but not necessarily as coordinated as this particular emergency requires. And now today, we huddle today, every day of the week, aligning resources and calling up areas of the city and county that require our attention and saying, okay, we're going to meet there at 8 o'clock, the best and the brightest, making sure that the providers are aligned and have the resources they need and have the service arrangement and complement that's necessary to address the level of problem. So if the person is going to be, focused on, like say there's 25 encampments and there's a person that's going to be leading the effort, they're going to be out there understanding there's 25, there's 30 encampments. What's the array of issues? We need mental health here. We need folks with drug and alcohol background training. We need someone with lived experience or an army of folks with lived experience. We want to have maybe security personnel there, and oftentimes LAPD is on call, maybe not on site, but on call. Sanitation services are going to be there as well. And all of these entities meeting at the same time every day, pointing out where we're going to go. That's how the mayor was able to get over 1,000 people housed in her first 100 days. And I'll give you another idea of what that looks like. So when I was at St. Joseph Center as a CEO and we worked on the boardwalk of Venice, we also did a collaborative effort. It was the first of bringing city and county together with a service provider. And the way we did it, all coordinated, huddling every day at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And we housed about 35 people a week over a 6-week period, housing everyone off the boardwalk. For the mayor, in her endeavor with the city and county and help with Measure H and city initiatives, we were able to house 85 people a week. Our goal is to get to 200 and 300 people a week. But you can see the growth, and all of that comes from, rather than having one agency over there in their silo and this one over there in that silo, saying bring resources together, align resources, focusing on unsheltered homelessness, addressing the crisis at hand, the encampments, and all of the people who are suffering outdoors, to focus our efforts and really watch and see what we can do to turn that around.
Because you're spot on, because I can tell you that, in these conversations, and I have every conversation with a city leader at this desk, obviously homelessness is the #1 priority, and everyone's got the best of intentions. I feel sincerity and hard work behind everyone's words, and yet, this crisis seems to escalate and escalate and escalate. Have you seen, and are you seeing progress in this cooperation?
Yes.
You have the goals, but are you seeing, and it doesn't have to be huge goals, huge progress immediately, because this is a new approach. And you've only been in the role for a few months. I don't want to, you're learning as well, but are you seeing that it's working?
Right. So, the one thing that we're looking at is what happens when you focus on encampments. And we are seeing results. People are responding. People in encampments want to be indoors. Obviously, moving folks into motels can be costly. We're looking at alternative interim housing efforts, and that's really important to make this more affordable and sustainable. But for the mayor, again, to bring over 1,000 people in and 80% success rate, meaning we bring people in and they stay in. It means the service providers are doing a great job making people feel good and settled and giving them the resources that they need to move along. We also measure our success by how long does it take to move a person from an encampment into permanency.
Right.
And we are seeing that is shrinking by number of days. When we were starting this out a couple years ago at St. Joseph Center, we basically said, look, we could have a person in interim 6 months to a year. We're seeing people moving through the system sometimes in 60 or 90 days. And sure, the mayor is saying, we want to speed this up. I want to move people much faster, and we agree, and we're working on that. But we're already seeing less days from an encampment to permanency than we've seen in the past. That trend is very encouraging. And then there's this notion of how long does it take a person from interim to get from the interim to permanent, and really how long when a building goes up and it's got a certificate of occupancy, how long does it take to fill the building? And that's another thing we hear from the mayor and from the board of supervisors, that they want us to move much faster in this process. And so overall, we used to see over 365 days, over a year. And then we got down to, maybe 6 months. Of late, we've, 120 days. And of late, we've gotten down to about 45 days that it takes from certificate of occupancy to move in. And our goal is to get closer now to 15 to 30 days. And all of that is coming about as a result of many, many teams at the city and county level getting together to say, okay, we need to coordinate. Who should we be focusing on, right? Like together, and saying, okay, let's focus on the people who have documents. They're ready to go. So we call this document readiness. Okay, let's focus on that group. They're ready to go. It makes sense. And also we've been talking about a universal application. Wow, people can fill this out online. They don't have to get a ride to a building and stand in line. And all of those are things that will increase access and speed of getting people from interim to permanency or in those buildings once they're ready for occupancy. And those are things that it's taken years to get to, but the city and county, the department heads across the county coming together to do what's right.
You speak about the process, and the process obviously on, where they're going to go, end of it, and, getting those buildings ready and filled. But then you also mentioned the document ready part. The document ready part obviously has its peril because it's complicated. Some people don't have the capacity, the skill set, the understanding. How is that getting simplified? Not even just because of, one stop, but how people know to do it, or because even the brightest, the boldest, and the most educated amongst us can have trouble filling out forms, especially when it comes to city issues.
Yeah, I have trouble filling out forms, right? So one of the roles that we're really leaning into is the housing navigator. And we are putting quite a bit of increased resource in that area. And that navigator is the person that walks alongside the previously homeless individual or the person who's in the shelter and starts to get their documents together. If it's a birth certificate, if it's a social security card, identification card, benefits, and getting them ready to not only get into housing, but also sustain themselves in housing if there's going to be any portion of the rent that they pay themselves. So these navigators are really important. Walking alongside, removing barriers, translating, helping people stay encouraged, because it can be so discouraging to feel like, you need to have the documents, you can't move forward. It's the reason why the mayor said, some of this is silly. We know people are struggling. We found them intense. There should be some presumed eligibility that should go along with this. And I know we're talking to HUD about what we can do to remove even some of the delays that we see in just trying to get the documents. But all in all, we know that the navigators are going to be central to moving this process forward. It's a big help, I think, in helping, assisting people in navigating the process.
I don't even know if there's an answer to this question, but the fact that you have an enormous amount of experience, with St. Joseph's, and even prior to that, you've had a career of helping people. I fully believe in this thing I heard many years ago that people need three things. They need something to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. And in a very odd way, that community is even created on the streets in these encampments because they have, relationships, friends, families, animals. And how is that psychological, human part of this issue being addressed? Because it's not just, I'm going to put you in a hotel room, I'm going to put you in an apartment, I'm going to put you in, I might be able to get you a job. Where's that, I'm a person with needs of a community and needs to know someone cares about me and needs to, raise me up internally as well as externally.
Well, I agree with the three things you said, and I would say connection, purpose, and hope.
Got it.
And that's why we've always believed that the outreach mechanism, the person that provides outreach to the person on the bench, in the park, in the tent, is so important. Because that human connection, that person saying, I'm here, I care about you. And I was talking to a group of folks and they were saying, well, why is it that it seems that sometimes people who are on the streets, they don't want help? And I said, well, have you ever had something bad happen and you're with friends or family and they circle around and what's the first thing we do? We go, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. It's just a human instinct. And especially if you've lived your life experiencing trauma or rejection, hurt, pain, poverty, you get really used to going, I'm okay.
Or I don't trust you.
I don't trust you. I don't want it, etc. And that's why we say in outreach, you keep coming back and you stay consistent because you never know if it's going to be the 20th time or the 55th time that you say, hey, what can I do for you? That the person says yes, because you're building that relationship. I also think it's really important, who is saying hello and who is visiting the tent, that we rely on people with lived experience who understand what it's like to go from I'm okay to I'm not okay. That sense of connection, purpose, and hope. I think the connection comes from that human connection. And as you said, people find it everywhere. They find it on the streets. They find it sadly in gangs, right? That's why we try to rebuild community around folks who have been in spaces where all they can turn to is something that isn't good for them, to turn that around and rebuild community. Kids who are coming out of foster care, we have to rebuild a sense of family and community, and it can work. So we do rebuild connection and community by having that outreach worker. Eventually it becomes the community in the interim housing space or in the permanent housing space. Is so important. And purpose, as you said, working, giving back, joining the group that's advocating on behalf of people who are unhoused. All of that brings purpose and hope, knowing that the situation they're in is not the end game. It's where they are, and it doesn't have to remain that way. And we have to deliver that sense of hope. I think that's why this moment is so important, because we all need hope, right? The citizens of LA and the county of Los Angeles need to know that things are going to get better, and that the officials are determined to change things around. There's a new LAHSA in place to do that, and I think all of that helps us have a sense of hope.
How are you making changes and adjustments to maybe address things that could have been improved upon or maybe had criticism against? But what are you hoping and what are you putting in place?
Well, the one thing that I have been so appreciative of is that the folks at LAHSA work really, really hard. They work really long hours, and it's hard if you don't have that sense of purpose and focus that can bring that all together and make meaning of all that time that's spent working. And I've been spending a lot of time looking at LAHSA's mission, which is to drive solutions towards ending the crisis of homelessness. I'm paraphrasing, because I'm a little over 100 days and still getting it. But the driving part, the leading part, the being strategic, the being collaborative, is what I'm reminding the team is our purpose. We should be coming up with ideas. We are not on the sideline. We are leading the effort. We are coming up with ideas. We are collaborative in nature, but a strong force moving things forward. And when you don't have that CEO or leader driving us back to mission, driving us to purpose, moving us forward, responding to the crisis. I mean, one of the things we did in response to the crisis is we set up a multi-departmental crisis response team. And that means, yes, people who are doing what they've always done or are doing because they're tasked to at LAHSA, we want them to continue to do what they're doing. You know, if they're getting contracts signed or getting contracts executed or helping with programs or auditing efforts, do that. But we also need to move very quickly and swiftly in alignment with what the mayor, the Board of Supervisors, the council members are saying is important, and we need to be out there in community and in the spas and in those encampments bringing solutions. So we've lifted up that group, and we're expediting how we work with the contracts team and how we work with the providers to be support to them, to assist them in rolling out the work that they are tasked with. And we believe that that's an important part of the turnaround. I mean, there's lots for us to do. And, you know, we realize we got to keep pushing forward.
You do have to keep pushing forward because, as we said at the very beginning of this, you know, the numbers have increased. But those numbers represent humans, and those humans have a story. Each individual story, there might be similarities, common denominators, but they're all individuals. Have you learned that there is a, you know, who are these people? Why are they there? Obviously, there's an increase in those that are have mental health problems as well as drug addiction problems. Is that where we're seeing the highest increase, or are we literally seeing people who just cannot afford housing in Los Angeles? I mean, who are these people? What have we learned from this count?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you noting the human component of this, because that's where it takes an entire community to lift up folks who are struggling, extremely vulnerable. And yes, you do see folks who are struggling with various areas of mental health concerns and health concerns, but the vast majority of the folks are on our streets because of an economic situation, because they aren't able to pay the rent. And the UCSF report that came out recently really busted some of those myths around whether people want help. They want help. When we go out to encampments, you know, when we talk about a person, Joe or John or Sue, when we would go out with the mayor and with many of the members of the Board of Supervisors out to various programs, people light up. They do feel that sense of hope, and they say yes. And many of them start with, you know, I lost a job, I hurt myself, someone I loved passed away, and everything just fell apart from there. And you see that and hear that time and time again. And I think what happens is, you know, maybe some of them, as we've heard, moms will say, you know, we couldn't pay the rent and we didn't want to get evicted, so, you know, just put everything in the car, and we just went from there. And then the car stopped running, and on and on and on. So we are seeing a great deal of diversity around who is out there, though we do see a significant overrepresentation of Black people among the homeless, making up 7 to 8% of the county population and 30 to 32% of those who are unhoused. So that is alarming, and we see that across the country. And so we know that there's something there, and it's very systemic in nature. But economically, we see that people are just struggling to pay the rent and to make ends meet.
How much do you think having no one else to turn to and the loneliness of trying to battle all of this by yourself plays into the increase that you're seeing out there?
Well, you know, I think we've all, those of us who are in this work, have imagined ourselves in a tent, you know, and imagine how isolating and lonely that feels. And I think that's why the folks who we're able to help are so grateful, because they realize that they're not alone. And they realize that there are folks in office, a mayor, a board of supervisors, council members, who care, who've dedicated their lives to trying to address this crisis. I think that sense of hope, of knowing that they don't have to continue to live in despair is so important. So I believe loneliness is probably a very important factor. And for so many people, it's broken relationships and loss of loved ones that has also contributed to how they have found themselves living in cars and tents. And we can be family to these folks. I mean, that was such an important part of our work at St. Joseph Center, and what I see across this country and what I see right here in LA, and so many service providers see themselves really locking arms with their clients and being family and community to them. And that's a really important part of the healing process.
Something that I actually haven't asked anyone that has been working on this crisis is, there's the flip side of the coin. There are those that are not homeless. There are those that have businesses in the city. There are those that rely on tourists. There are those that are actually, just even looking at their own neighborhoods and thinking, oh no. What do you want those people to hear and know and understand so that, even the tenderest of hearts will remain tender and not become calloused and want all of this to just end and not have compassion and emotion for the people that are in this tragedy?
Yeah, we all need connection, purpose, and hope. And the folks who have businesses and who own homes, they want to feel connected to their community, and so many of them feel connected to their unhoused neighbors. So many of them have found purpose in helping, and some of them have found purpose in activating and holding us accountable, those of us who are tasked with addressing this crisis. And I understand their frustration, and I get it, and I'm hearing them, and I'm listening to what they want to see. And we want to give hope that there are solutions and that we must work together, that everyone has to welcome housing in their community. And when I launched the work on Venice Beach, I was so encouraged by the neighbors, by the tourists, by the business owners that would come to me and say, what are we doing here? What are you doing? Please tell me you're not just sweeping people along and moving them along. Are you helping them? I mean, they were holding me accountable, and I said to them, yes, we're helping them. We're moving them in to a motel that's just, a couple miles away, and we'll be pairing them with permanent housing. And so many people said, thank you. Thank you for not just moving them along. And I think we all want the best for people, and I know there's a lot of frustration, but there's hope that I think we can hold on to, but it's going to require all of us working together.
Are you remaining optimistic? Are you remaining positive? I mean, it's a pretty daunting task, a necessary one that must be done, but are you staying optimistic?
Absolutely. I mean, I said connection, purpose, hope, and that's what keeps me doing this work after over 20 years, is I do feel a sense of connection to the work, both the people who are unsheltered and the people who do the work. And I find purpose in it. I found purpose in spending my life trying to come up with solutions and working with elected officials to address this crisis. And I do have hope. I really do see signs of things improving in light of everything I see, and despite of seeing some numbers and seeing so much pain and suffering. Seeing the numbers is discouraging, but I remain hopeful.
So you've been on a listening tour. And so if people want to share information or thoughts or questions with you, outside of this, actually you being in the community organizations listening, how can they reach out to LAHSA and to the team that you are building and have built and are working with? How can they get in touch?
Well, we have a website. It's LAHSA.org, and there's a portal for folks to reach out. I hope that I will hear from folks. Yes, we are on a listening tour, and we're hearing such thoughtfulness, such a deep concern for people who are struggling out there, and we want to be and we will be a part of the solution.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's been a delight to speak with you. Continue the good work, and I look forward to having you back where we can talk about all the wonderful changes that have taken place and all the progress that is being made.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much. And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.